You're listening to WCAT Radio, your home for authentic Catholic programming.
From Anglican to Catholic, James Halpin III. Welcome everyone to Polycarp's Paradigm. My name is Eric Robinson. I have a new friend with me, James, and we met a couple months ago, and we are both converts to the Catholic faith, but from very different angles. And I told James, growing up as an evangelical non-denominational Protestant, it was a lot harder for me to become Catholic because I didn't even know what a sacrament was. But James rebuked me. He said, no, it was harder for me because mine was closer to the truth without being the truth.
Well, it's not a competition, but everyone's life experience is real, you know? Yeah, yes. Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I just remember that conversation sticking out in my mind. I'm like, that's a good point. Like, that would be so hard.
For sure.
But yeah, let's begin with your story. First of all, just who are you? What's your current situation like? And then we'll dig into your past a little.
Thanks so much for having me. This is a real blessing. This is my first time as a guest on a podcast, so we'll see where this goes, you know? So, yeah, my name's James Halpin, and I've lived in Denver now for 4.5 months. So I actually met you, Eric, my first day in Denver, which was super funny.
And I was only there 2 days before that. I had moved 2 days before you. Yeah.
Okay, great. Perfect. So I, landed Denver, mid-March. It's the weekend that, as you remember, everything gets shut down. And I move in late at night, and one of my roommates invites me the next morning to a hike with some young adults. And I end up in your car. We go and we kind of spend the day hiking together. And that was the first Sunday without Mass here in Denver. And we did the Liturgy of the Word together on top of the mountain, and had a great conversation then. And then, it was great to reconnect.
Yeah, for sure.
Weeks ago. So, I've been in Denver now for 4.5 months. Right before I was in Denver, I've been kind of all over the country at this point, it seems. But I was a seminarian for a religious community called the Apostles of the Interior Life. We were sponsored by the Archdiocese of Kansas City in Kansas, and I was going to seminary at Kenrick Glennon Seminary in St. Louis, Missouri, if you can keep track of all that.
Wow.
And so I was living in St. Louis. I was there for almost 2 years in the theology program, and prior to that, I did my philosophy in Kansas City, Kansas, through an institution called Donnelly College. And so, basically, I spent almost 4 years in the seminary in different parts of the Midwest as part of the Apostles of the Interior Life, and that'll come back in our conversation, no doubt. And prior to that, I was a student at Texas A&M University. Whoop! And
Hook 'em Aggies.
Oh, gosh. That's right, you're a Longhorn, I forgot.
Yeah, okay. No, gig 'em. Yeah, gig 'em, man. That's cool.
Yeah, okay. We'll just have a little bit of a piece in this conversation,
yes.
I hope. So I graduated in 2016. I was there for 4 years. I studied business and several other things. And then, I grew up in Dallas prior to that. So Dallas, College Station, Kansas, St. Louis, and now Denver.
All right.
That's kind of been the track.
Okay. And you grew up Episcopalian / Anglican. We kind of have to say that.
Sure.
But tell us what that was like. You were born, I guess, in the Dallas-Fort Worth area.
Right.
And you grew up in that religious environment. What was that like, and when did you first, for yourself, want to follow Jesus, I guess I could say? When did it kind of become your own faith as well?
Right, absolutely. Yeah, so I can say right off the bat, I loved growing up Episcopalian, Anglican. I can say that as I've kind of gotten older, there's been a little bit more maybe of... people are a little more choice with their words as there's been more division within the Church of England over time. When I was a kid, I had no idea the difference between the two. So if I kind of vacillate between those terms, when I was growing up, to me they were synonyms. But I grew up in a beautiful Anglican church, very small parish of about 300 families. And we always had 3 to 5 Anglican priests ministering to us. So it was an amazing environment. Had a beautiful reverence for liturgy and this beautiful Catholicity about the place. It was devoted to the patronage of St. Lawrence. And, I loved that parish.
Wow.
And I go back to it all the time. Because one of the things later when I became Catholic, just the magnitude of this church is beautiful because it's universal, but it's overwhelming because there's just so many daggone people in it.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, and just growing up in a super small, intimate parish environment was such a blessing. There was this beautiful unity in the place. There was a beautiful spirit of prayer and formation.
Wow.
It was a beautiful liturgical environment. It kind of shined for that reason. And everyone there was my friend.
Wow.
You know, and I consider it just one of the biggest gifts from the Father that I could grow up in a loving Christian environment like that.
Yeah. And so for you, was it always like, man, I feel so nourished and blessed by this, that it was kind of natural for you to, it was always your own. It was always your own faith. It was always like an ongoing process. Because I know that's true for a lot of Christians, where it's like,
sure,
I don't have this one moment. It's more like a gradual deepening.
I think a deepening in stages with my human maturity is probably the best fit for my experience. I can say there were definitely things missing in my upbringing and my Christian formation, but those are kind of the more typical things. So when you talk about it becoming my own, that was through some other things that the Lord would do later, basically at the end of my high school career. But there was nothing that I really would fault the parish for necessarily. It was just the path that the Father had in mind for me. But yeah, growing up Anglican, just to say a bit more about that, it was an amazing liturgical environment to grow up in, where I was catechized very well in Sunday school on the 7 sacraments, on the role of the priest, on divine worship, these things, and to be able to participate in the worship of God in an intimate way through serving at the altar was very key for me through the years of my boyhood and my adolescence. So I started kind of altar serving. I think I was a 4th grader, and I did it almost weekly up through high school.
Wow.
And had a natural knack for it and a natural love for it. And, Catholic surplus, icons everywhere. We had an iconographer in our parish, so Church of England parish covered in icons, so you can imagine it. But a beautiful kind of English style, small parish, and being able, and very beautiful vestments and an organ and a choir. If you can imagine this, like having 150, 200 people at Mass, but having 15 to 20 people singing choir at every liturgy.
Wow.
It's just kind of normal that 10% of the parishioners would be singing in the choir, I kind of wish we had that in our parishes here. So just there was this spirit of we love to worship God together and reverently, and we love to do it well with good taste. And for instance, like homilies, the sermons that I grew up with were 15 to 25 minutes probably, and they were all pre-written. They were like essays, conversational essays that the presider would do research on and prepare beforehand and pray with and read. And they were very intentional. And it's just kind of, that describes the whole environment of this kind of intentionality of we are here to unify and worship God together and do our best on a Sunday morning. And I'm very grateful for that.
That's awesome.
And so I think the hallmark of my religious experience through elementary school, middle school, most of high school was through altar serving, I would say. And having an intimate part in the planning and execution of liturgical worship. And that was very, very good for me. I'm kind of wired for that anyway. I would go on later as a seminarian to MC for the bishop several times at different masses, and so it just is a kind of a natural fit for me. But it was a really healthy environment, I would say.
And what was your perspective, or what kind of catechesis did you get on your view of the Catholic Church and the history of how the Church of England really separated from the Church of Rome? So what was that kind of like growing up?
I can say a few things. As for the history of the Church of England itself, I receive very little. That's not something that's typically addressed. I don't think that most Anglicans are fond of Henry VIII.
Okay.
It's difficult to be fond of Henry VIII,
right.
And many of them aren't fond of the Pope of that time either, and so
Right.
and usually what you hear is well, sometimes you have to break eggs to make omelets is what you would hear a lot, and so it's not that they're in my experience, it wasn't so much that there was a pride in our history, but it was viewed as an unfortunate accident of history.
Okay.
However, at the same time, there wasn't really a recognition of separation from the Catholic Church. And what I mean by that is the Anglican parish that I grew up in, this is not universal across the Church of England, but in my world, in the Episcopal Diocese of Fort Worth, in St. Lawrence Parish, under some very holy men, that world viewed itself as having everything that the Catholic Church has, and that is a sacramental life. And so in my catechesis as a boy, we were taught we have the real presence of Jesus in the Holy Eucharist, that we are commissioned in confirmation by the bishop when we come of age, that we are baptized and given new life as infants, that our marriages are sanctified through holy matrimony, that our special men are set apart for ministry through holy orders and ordination after a period of preparation and sacrifice. All of that was in that world. And for that reason, it's okay, we don't have a pope. We don't really want a pope, but we have bishops, And that was the understanding of that world that I came from. And I can say that I actually grew up with a vivid memory of a chart on the wall of our parish hall that was titled Apostolic Succession and had, as far back as they could go, which is really up into the early Middle Ages, I think, of all of the bishops who ordained who laid hands on who, all the way to Bishop Jack Eicher, the bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of Fort Worth.
Oh, wow.
And so I grew up understanding that apostolic succession is essential to the sacramental life. The sacramental life is essential to the Christian life.
Wow.
And that we have apostolic succession in the Church of England.
And that's why I told you, James, I thought you had it easier coming into the Catholic Church because so much was in common. It's
absolutely
incredible.
Exactly. Absolutely. And it's a double-edged sword, I can say for sure that those themes would carry over very well into the Catholic religion. Mm-hmm. But I think you can already see that there would be some major obstacles imposed by those because the doctrine of the Catholic Church disagrees with some of those key principles, with some of those holdings.
Yeah, kind of those assumptions of the Anglican perspective on apostolic succession, for instance, and what makes a valid bishop.
Exactly.
And all of those.
And everything hinges on that. And the Anglicans absolutely would acknowledge that. Everything hinges on that. The validity of holy orders, which is really, intellectually, was the biggest question that caused my heart to come to a reckoning later down the road.
Wow.
There are other aspects too, but it's is this true or not?
Yeah.
Because for 19 years I've been told it's true.
Wow.
And then now I'm meeting these people who are telling me, hey, hold on, that thing you learned over there is beautiful, but it's not over there, it's over here.
Oh.
And I'm you're asking me to give up everything that I've understood for my entire life, up to this point, to go out on a limb for this church that I've never been a member of and I don't have many connections to.
Wow.
And so it's where the heart and the head clash hard.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Man, so, take us into that as far as your college experience and what kind of started to lead you down the road to Rome.
For sure. So I think it's fair to say that I was walking down the road before I realized it was going to Rome.
Okay.
So you're just kind of setting out on a journey, and you don't exactly know where the destination is.
I'm in Assisi, which is on the way to Rome.
Yeah, exactly. So my conversion to the Catholic Church was not very much at all an intellectual one. It had those moments that were intellectual reckonings for me, and that with integrity I had to deal with and pray with and think about and study. However, that was not the principal means of my conversion. So my conversion was catalyzed by the way of grief, actually.
Really?
And so different people, the Lord uses different circumstances for different people. and fits the conversion to the person, I think, according to one's state of life and personality and experience. So for me, it was really a tragedy, the biggest tragedy so far in my life, that woke me up and caused me to pray as I had never prayed before. And that was the turning point when the faith became my own, because I needed it in a way that I hadn't experienced needing it before. And so my senior year of high school, actually the day before I turned 18, my best friend's mother passed away suddenly of a heart attack. And it was an inexplicable event. She was in good health. And as far as I know, the autopsy later on actually didn't reveal any reasons for her passing. She was, I think, 47. She was in her late 40s.
Wow.
And it was a spontaneous, unexpected passing. And I was very close with her. Her name was Mary Frances. I was close with her whole family. And this is a woman who loved me and treated me like a son. And Mary Frances, she was a devout Catholic, and happened to also be the most magnanimous person that I had yet met in my life. And there was a magnetism around this woman. There was a joy around this woman, a joy especially around hospitality, a joy especially in the Hispanic culture of dancing and bringing people together and cooking lots of food and having big parties and encountering the other person. And I loved her dearly, and she loved me. But yeah, in February of 2012, she passed away suddenly one day. And upon finding out that news, I cried, and I cried in a way that I had never cried before, and even really since. It really did feel like the world was ending. It was the first time for me that I had ever had someone close to me pass away, and I didn't have the tools or the relationship or the knowledge to deal with that. I didn't really know how to understand it. I didn't know what to do with all of the emotion, all of the grief. But the Lord knows what he's doing, right? So because of the way of grief, it actually brought me to encounter the Catholic faith really for the first time. So my first Mass that I ever attended in my memory was her funeral. My first rosary I ever prayed was at her wake. And all of these things I can remember so vividly. My first time ever going to adoration was shortly after her funeral, was to pray, because I quickly found, it was a gift of the Holy Spirit, that I only had peace when I was at Catholic Mass or in a Catholic chapel. I don't know why, but I really wanted that. And so I started going every day. And so my senior year of high school, one of my other friends named Mark, he invited me to come with him that Lent to daily Mass. And he kind of concocted this wonderful plan where his parents would drop him off at 7 a.m. Mass, and I would meet him there with my truck and take him to school. And if I wasn't there, he wouldn't get to school.
Oh, nice.
We had to be at band practice together. And so I had this discipline, started this discipline of going to daily Mass every day my senior year towards the end of my senior year of high school. And it was very fruitful for me. I mean, I was obviously, out of respect, not receiving communion. I didn't have a big argument about that or anything. I was just a man grieving. Yeah. And I was happy to be there in a place that gave me peace. Wow. And so we began that custom. And so we would go through the semester, through the end of the semester, this had been in the spring of 2012, going to Mass, beginning to pray out of that cry of suffering. And every now and then popping in the Adoration Chapel. But I had a pivotal experience. Some of my other Catholic friends surrounding the situation invited me on a retreat with that Catholic parish. And it was actually a pretty phenomenal parish. It's kind of famous. It's named St. Anne. It's in Capel. It has 8,000 families.
Wow.
Super robust, kind of the polar opposite of the tiny parish I grew up in. So I'm on this retreat with 350 high schoolers, something like that, and I have no idea what I'm doing, where I am, but it's a spring retreat. It's about a month after Mary Frances's funeral, and that was actually probably my first real memory of adoration. And they bring the Lord in for all of us to adore together, with praise and worship music going, and they have like a big altar thing set up in the middle of the room, and the priest is processing around. And I remember so vividly in that time of prayer, crying again, of course, the Lord speaking to me crystal clear, "This is your home."
Wow.
And I had no idea what he meant by that. But just very strongly, over and over again, "This is your home." And leaving that adoration, I still didn't know what to do with that. Nothing was clear to me. But that was imprinted on my memory very deeply. And so, so then daily Mass, finish the semester. Go into the summer, actually go to Philmont Scout Ranch with Boy Scouts. Go to Catholic Mass right before leaving the trek. There was a retired bishop that was out at Philmont Scout Ranch. And I was talking to him after Mass. He gave me a rosary. It was like probably this first or second time anyone had given me a rosary. So I prayed the rosary every day on the hike because I couldn't go to Mass. I didn't know what the mysteries were. I just knew that you said an Our Father, 10 Hail Marys, and a Glory Be at the end.
Wow.
And so I was doing that every day because I needed prayer in my life like oxygen.
Wow.
My heart needed it so badly. So then in the fall of 2012, with all of those seeds laid, I went to Texas A&M University. Praise the Lord.
Yeah,
and praise the Lord. Exactly. And so I end up in a dorm on campus, and I don't have a car my first year at A&M. And I was in a position where I really didn't want to leave home at that point in life, with all the things going on, but consented to do so. And I knew that I needed God, and I needed a church, and I needed a place to pray, because I was still just struggling for breath.
Wow.
It's like being submerged for a long time underwater, and you still feel like I'm coming up and I'm gasping for air. And I didn't have access to a good Anglican church in the area. And of course I was still going to church with my family every week too. But that just wasn't an option at Texas A&M. But there was a Catholic center that was 10 minutes walking distance from my dorm. And so I started to go there to pray, because I was like, oh, well, I went to Mary Francis's church back in Capel, like maybe I'll go to this Catholic church here in College Station. It's kind of the same thing, and be able to pray there and find some peace. And I ended up actually going to daily Mass there as well, not receiving communion, not really talking to anybody, not really interested in becoming Catholic, not really interested in really joining that community. Also, I was pretty introverted at the time, and so it was just overwhelming, the number of people that were there every day.
Right.
But anyway, that began, and a few weeks go by, and one day after Mass, one of the staff members at St. Mary's, it's the name of the parish, St. Mary's Catholic Center, comes up to me and corners me. It's around lunchtime, and just says, "James, you want to come to lunch with me? I want to hear your story." She had noticed there was this kid, knew his name was James, going to Mass all the time, not receiving communion, not talking to anybody. This is very suspicious. And I was just desperate for somebody to ask me that question, because I still didn't really have any friends at A&M. A couple acquaintances, but no really close friends. And so this woman, Christine Cranley, bless her heart, takes me out to lunch, and we sit down together, and I was just begging for someone to do this. I just unload on her everything going on in my heart.
Wow.
I don't remember what I said or what she said for the next almost hour, but vividly remember at the very end, she just looks me dead in the eye, says, "You need a spiritual director." I was like, "Christine, I don't really have time. Also, I don't really know what that is. But I have a lot going on. I have a lot on my plate." And she's just super stern with me. Like, "This needs to be your number 2 priority behind prayer. You need a spiritual director." I was like, "Oh, wow, okay." So she's like, "I'll get you a list." And so she gets me a list, and I looked down the names, and I recognized one name, and it was a woman named Sister Elena. I forgot an important detail.
You know a sister?
No. How did I know a sister? Because I had signed up for RCIA, which I should have mentioned earlier.
At St. Mary's?
At St. Mary's.
Okay.
Not because I wanted to become Catholic, but somebody told me, "Hey, that'd be a good place to go ask all these questions that you have." And I also kind of wanted to argue.
Okay.
Wanted to do that. And so And I knew, and I had a hunch that, okay, maybe one day I would join the Catholic Church, because like the Church of England in America is kind of dying out.
Yeah.
And it's just not a viable option outside of my little bubble that I grew up in that I loved. And so I was like, okay, well, Catholic Church seems kind of similar. Like, I kind of felt Catholic already. Like, maybe one day I'll join. Like, that would make sense if I don't live in Capel forever.
Right.
Okay, so I had signed up for RCIA, and the first class was taught by this woman, Sister Elena Morcelli, who had just come to College Station like a week or two before. She was Italian, and she gave a talk on the Trinity and creation that totally blew my mind.
Wow.
It was like the most amazing thing I had ever heard up to that point. And so anyway, I had remembered that this woman had given a talk. Okay, fast forward again. Christine gives me a list. Spiritual directors, looking down. I only recognize two names. Father David Conderla, who was the pastor. And I was like, okay, well, that guy's probably super busy. Sister Elena. I was like, oh, I've heard of that name. Oh, she just got here. She's probably not busy. That was my thought process. So I sent this email to her, and I was like, dear Sister Elena, like, Christine told me I need a spiritual director. I was wondering if you're available. By the way, I'm not Catholic, but I'm in RCIA. I hope that works.
Wow.
I hope I qualify. I just really need to talk to somebody. And like within probably 30 minutes, I get a reply from her. It's like, yes, absolutely. Today or tomorrow, let me know. I'll move my schedule.
Wow.
And I was like, wow, okay, that's great. And so I sit down with this woman, and she was part of a religious community called the Apostles of the Interior Life.
Okay.
We're just going to call them AVI from now on, because that's a lot shorter. It's the
cool
Italian
name, though.
It's
Apostles of the Interior Life? It's like, that's epic.
Yeah. It's a beautiful religious community. And the AVI, in case you're wondering, it's the acronym from the Italian. So Apostoli della Vita Interiore, Apostles of the Interior Life.
Wow.
So I sit down with Elena, and she begins just kind of letting me unload again, kind of like I did with Christine. And then she was like, you need to pray. I was like, I am praying. Isn't that clear? Like, I go to Mass all the time, and like, I prayed the rosary over the summer, it's like, here I am in your office, and I'm really busy being a student and saving the world and stuff. and then she teaches me mental prayer, which was something I had never encountered before. I don't know why. But the whole idea of using the scriptures to dialogue personally with God. Super simple. Don't know why it never occurred to me, but it's the most treasured method of prayer in the history of Christianity, the treasure of the church, and almost nobody does it. And It's the most transformative thing you can do in your life, along with the sacraments. And yeah, so I was like, okay, what do I do? I have a Bible. Like, how does this work?
Yeah.
And she was like, okay, well, how about this? So she gives me a little booklet with the daily Mass readings. She's like, just take this, read this slowly, and ask the Holy Spirit to enlighten you, and for something to stick out to you, and then just sit with it and give yourself like 20 minutes, and then just remain with those words. And if anything comes up, dialogue with the Lord, and at the end, write it down in a journal and make some kind of concrete resolution. Like, what am I going to do in my day differently because of this conversation I just had with the Lord? And I was like, that's it? I was like, oh, that's super simple. I can do that.
Yeah.
And it took to it immediately. Like, I was craving something like this.
Whoa.
And so then, this was probably early September when we had this conversation.
Your freshman year?
My freshman year.
Wow.
Yeah, of college. I start every morning, get up 20 minutes earlier, and pray under my bunk bed in my room in my little sofa chair thing.
Yes.
And that was the beginning of my prayer life, was being faithful to that. 20 minutes every morning before class of popping open this booklet and spending some time with the Gospels and listening to the Lord. And the Lord consoled me a great deal through that very quickly. And I fell in love with that method of prayer, with just resting and remaining with the Word of God. It was super intuitive and natural to me, and I was like, where has this been all my life?
Yeah, so like a Lectio Divina.
Exactly. What I would later find out is Lectio Divina.
Okay.
Exactly. And that Lectio, to this day, is the most important thing that I do, along with go to Mass. Yeah. So that was the beginning of everything changing. And, when we have friends that, have a conversion, that was really my personal conversion, was being faithful to that. we have friends that have a conversion. You'll often hear feedback from people like, man, what's going on with Joe Bob? Like, he's totally different now. He's so much calmer. He's so much more fun to be with. You know, he's just the roughness around the edges are kind of smoothed out. People were saying that about me. My family sure was saying that about me. Like, wow, James, you're so much less anxious. Wow, James, you're much happier than we remember you. What's going on? You know? And
God's
like,
speaking to me.
Exactly. It's like, well, I didn't really know how to articulate it at the time, but I would just say, like, I'm spending time with God who loves me every morning. I don't know what else to say, you know?
Wow.
But just, very quickly, it just dawned on me, like, I can't imagine living apart from this. I can never go back to living apart from this.
Yeah.
Living apart from a personal, relational, disciplined time of sacrifice, of gratitude to the Lord.
Wow.
And so, kind of RCIA would go on learning more things. St. Mary's is a phenomenal campus ministry. We brought in phenomenal people to give talks. I had a couple phenomenal small group leaders. It was phenomenal. And, you know, everything, I was stunned at one thing after another as pieces would just begin to fall down, and I would just start to see how beautiful the Catholic faith was, and I would begin to fall in love with it just because it was brilliant. Like, its inner logic, its radiance, its harmony within it. It was just shining through for me in these weekly RCIA meetings and these discussions I was having, and in my personal prayer. And really, that was the driving force of the conversion itself. So the important thing to state is that even though I was meeting with a Catholic nun every 2 to 3 weeks for an hour to talk about my spiritual life, never once did she ever pressure me to become Catholic.
Wow.
That is extremely important to emphasize. It's not that James ran off, made a bunch of Catholic friends, and just joined the party.
Yeah.
Nobody ever did. But there were definitely points of reckoning. And so I remember another point was probably the following January. Okay. Christmas break, my freshman year, I went home. The kind of order of life that I had been living was taken away from me. I was no longer in my dorm. I didn't have my normal class schedule. And so I think there was like a month that I went without doing mental prayer that Christmas break because I just went home and I wasn't faithful the first couple days, and then it slipped and it slipped and it slipped. And there was this growing like guilt in my heart, and then it became a shame. And it was like January, and I looked at my journal. I was like, oh my gosh, it's been a month since I've prayed. No wonder I feel terrible. And so that was a grace. And run to the chapel, do my mental prayer again, come back. This is like the first week of January. And another of my friends from high school who was now at A&M, who was Catholic, approached me and just said like, hey, James, how's RCIA going? Are you going to become Catholic this year? And I'm like, what? I'm not going to become Catholic this year. She's like, oh, I'm sorry, like, the clock is ticking, you know? It's like, Ash Wednesday's in, like, a month and a half. Like, you got the rite of election coming up. And it, like, had not dawned on me that I was on a train that was approaching a destination.
Wow.
I was just enjoying the journey. And I kind of freaked out. And so I was like, I don't know if I want to do this, you know? And so, gosh. And so that's when I think at the time I was starting to face a few hurdles. And the first hurdle came down. The first hurdle for me was Mary, the Blessed Mother. Okay. I was just like, look, I don't want to like get into all the doctrinal back and forth on this. Some people have that gift. It wasn't really my thing. I was just like, this is just kind of, I'm not really sure if this is sitting. Like, I was praying the rosary and everything.
That's so funny.
But I was just like, it wasn't that I was rejecting it. I was just like, I just don't get it.
Yeah.
But Sister Elena had been kind of kept pushing me forward a little bit, so we were already on the habit in the fall semester of 20 minutes of meditation a day in daily mass. So she's like, what's the next step? She was like, we got to get Mary in on this guy. And so she was kind of pressuring me at that point to start praying the rosary and challenging me on it. She was like, you have seen the fruit of this in your life already at their funeral and at the hike over the summer at Philmont. Like, you should be doing this. But like a full rosary every day was like way, way more than I could handle. And so we came up with a solution that I would just pray a decade every night before I go to bed.
Okay.
So that would be the last thing I do. If I fall asleep, like, whatever.
And she actually taught you how to meditate on the mysteries of this
We
point?
didn't really get that far.
Just pray.
She was like, I could really only take bite-sized pieces. It wasn't until after I was Catholic that I found out what the mysteries were, I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
I could be wrong on that, but I probably am, but that's okay.
Yes.
So, I'm laying in bed one night, and I, probably a couple weeks in, and I was kind of still reeling from that question from my friend. Like, am I going to do this year? I don't really know. Like, I'm not sure. Like, this is a big commitment.
Right.
I'm just getting over a lot of grief right now. I don't know if I'm ready to make that dive. And I was praying the rosary just that decade, couple minutes. Couple minutes. Highly recommend, listeners, couple minutes.
Yes.
And just this moment with Mary of her speaking to my heart and just saying over and over again in the sweetest, most gentlest way, trust my son.
Wow.
Trust my son. And those words from a mom gave me the courage to get up the next morning and keep going. Just trust my son. So I got up the next morning, went to pray my meditation, my mental prayer with Jesus, right? And it was really the words of Our Lady that encouraged me to do that. And very quickly after that, my affinity for Our Lady exploded.
Wow.
I was just like, I've got a mom.
Wow.
In heaven, taking care of me. Like, wow. And my friends know I've always kind of been a mama's boy in some way. And it's like, that's always been kind of part of my life.
Funny.
It's always like, that just clicked immediately into place for me. Okay, then another, probably a couple weeks go by. And my next hurdle that I'm, trying to wrap my head around is, the Pope. Papal infallibility.
Wow.
What do I do with this? I'm used to having bishops in my life and stuff, but this whole idea of this guy's never wrong, is what do I do with this?
Yeah.
No, of course, I was taught better than that, but it's how could I accept the doctrine that there was a man who truly speaks for God? How could anyone but Jesus do that? And frankly, just kind of in a rebellious way, I was just I just don't want to accept that kind of discipline of obedience. So this is, I'm going to try to describe this, and it's difficult to explain if you haven't lived it, but this is where I see the most fundamental difference between the cultures of the Anglican Church and the culture of the Catholic Church. In Catholic life, there is a discipline of obedience kind of at the root of everything. A holy, healthy obedience of I submit my mind, heart, and will to my pastor, to the bishop, to the pope, and trust the charism of the Holy Spirit to lead and guide me. Now, that's not at all opposed to my reason and to my faith and all that stuff. You can do a podcast on that later. But there's this culture of I accept what is given to me by these father figures in the church. That's why we call them father, right? In the Episcopal Church, or the Anglican world, there's a much more kind of democratic culture. The parishioners hire their pastor. The presbyterate elects their bishop. Okay? So it's the bottom up instead of the top down. The stream is flowing in a different way.
Yeah.
And the chair of Peter is the ultimate top down. It was literally I cannot tell you how difficult this was for me to swallow.
Wow.
Because it felt like the world turning on its head. All of my I'm used to the river flowing from the bottom up, and now I'm going to join a world where it flows from the top down. Everything is backwards, and I'm I have to be obedient. Whoa. As a Protestant, if you disagree, I don't want to demean this. I have great reverence, but as a Protestant, ultimately, if you disagree, you can split, and you can go do your thing and disagreement with the other, and you can do that in goodwill as a Protestant. Absolutely. But as a Catholic, you can't do that, because you believe that Jesus has founded a church, and he's established a visible unity, and that trumps what my little brain thinks.
Yeah.
I'm having a flashback right now, something I forgot to mention. My first ever Catholic youth group, that senior year of high school, the topic was the magisterium, actually.
Really?
Yeah. And I remember the youth minister getting up there, and my friends were like, oh my gosh, we invited James to the magisterium talk. What have we done? And the youth minister gets up there, And he just kind of, in a loving but pretty forceful way, just kind of yells at the crowd, if you think your 16-year-old self has figured something out about faith or morals that 2,000 years of priests, bishops, and saints have gotten wrong, you need to get on your knees and pray for some humility.
Wow. James.
Ingrained in my memory. Okay, so now we're fast-forwarding a year, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I might have to pray for some humility. Whoa. Okay, so you see the paradigm is shifting, okay? And so the sisters, the Apostles of the Interior Life, sometimes they do these movie nights where they invite students to their convent and they make homemade Italian pizza and they watch a movie together and they have a discussion.
Yes.
So it's like, absolutely. So I show up. I have no idea what we're going to watch. We end up watching this movie called Carol, the Man Who Became Pope.
I love that movie. My parents love it too.
Correction, it was Carol, the Pope, the Man, part 2. But it was important that I watched that one first, actually.
You watched part 2 first?
I watched part 2 first, yeah.
Okay.
It was the Pope, the Man.
The Pope, the Man.
And which basically, it's a 3-hour documentary thing. No, sorry. It's like a
docudrama.
Docudrama, thank you. It's like a docudrama, 3 hours. And part 2 takes place from the moment that John Paul II is elected to his death. So how long was he Pope? 35 years? I should know that.
It was about 27 years, I believe.
Rounding down.
27.
So like 27 years as Pope. There's all of the crazy events that happened during his papacy. And so I come over. I have no idea what the movie is. I'm just like, I just want to hang out with people. Also, the sisters are my neighbors, and so it was like in the neighborhood. Yeah. And they throw up this movie, and I'm sitting there riveted, watching this man in white be a father to everyone in the world. And just watching him travel from Africa, Australia, South America, all over Europe, to Asia. These crowds of people of every background, not just England, of every background and culture, flock to this man and love him like a dad.
Wow. And
I'm sitting there watching this movie, and I'm like, I have no more objections to the Pope. Because he's a father.
Wow.
And I need a father in my life. And I need all the fathers that flow from that.
Yes.
The bishops and the priests. And I was like, suddenly it made sense to me.
Wow.
It was a real grace.
That's incredible. Oh my goodness. And for everyone who's listening, you can actually look that video up on YouTube for free. Carol, the Man Who Became Pope, and Carol, the Pope, the Man. I believe it's still on YouTube for free. That's how I first saw it.
That's awesome. Wow. Oh gosh, it was such an edifying use of my time. Yeah. And so leave that night. So now I'm good with Mary. Now I'm good with the Pope.
What else is there, James?
The most difficult thing, though, is like Pope Part 2.
Ooh.
Is the doctrine from Leo the 13th that is infallible, that the Church of England does not have valid holy orders.
Yep.
That they lost them after they split from the Church of Rome. Apostolicae Curae was the last stumbling block between me and the Catholic faith. Because I knew that if I accepted that Jesus instituted fathers, and that the Pope was the father, and that the Holy Spirit gave him the charism of truth, which does make sense in the world of fallen and changing unsteadiness. However, but for James personally, that would require me to renounce what I had believed for my entire life up to that point. That the entire sacramental liturgical world of the Church of England was a pious exercise, but was not, in fact, the true sacrifice of the Mass. And that the Holy Eucharist that I had grown up worshiping was not, in fact, Jesus Christ.
Just a piece of bread.
Right.
It was a shadow, a preparation for the fullness.
Right.
But it wasn't the real thing.
Right.
Yikes.
And that the confirmation that I had received from the bishop was a beautiful prayer that definitely brought grace into my heart, but was not the empowerment of confirmation. All of that was the final reckoning, really.
How in the world did you overcome that?
So there's something that Sometimes we have a joke amongst directees of Sister Elena. We have what one has coined as ESD, Emergency Spiritual Direction. So, fast forward, it's Holy Week of 2013. Tuesday night, it's the normal RCA time. We're having rehearsal for the Easter Vigil. So at this point, I was pretty on board. I was still pretty uneasy. And the temptations were growing. The temptations of doubt were raging in my heart. And we go into the church to kind of walk through the liturgy. And we're all handed a slip of paper with our lines on it, right?
Oh, I know these lines.
Yes, exactly. So I'm going to paraphrase, but you might remember them like verbatim.
No, go for it.
I find out that I need to say in front of the Catholic community that I believe and consent that all that is taught by the Catholic Church is true and revealed by God.
Yep.
And I looked at that word all, and my heart dropped. And I was like,
including that encyclical by Pope Leo XIII?
Well, for me, it was just even like, I don't even know all that the church has believed. I haven't had time to read all the books yet.
Yeah.
How can I say that with honesty?
Yeah.
Much less this encyclical that is still biting the back of my foot,
Yeah.
And I got cold sweat, and I don't really remember the rest of rehearsal. Wow. And I was just like, what am I going to do? Because it was a reckoning of my conscience.
Wow.
I can't lie. I'm not going to mess this up.
Exactly.
And so I go into ESD on Holy Thursday of that week.
Emergency Spiritual Direction.
And I'm like, Sister Helena, we have a problem. and I tell her, I was like, this is all getting really intense. I should just wait. Like, St. Mary's brings people into the church twice a year, because we brought 50 people in that Easter, and we had another 20 or 30 every November that we bring in, because we just have so many people interested in the faith down in College Station. And I was like, look, I have another chance in 6 months. I have my whole life ahead of me. I don't want to rush this. It's, I don't want to, it's kind of like the day before your wedding, it's just like, I don't want to make a really dumb mistake here, and I just want to be at peace with this, And Sister Elena was going to, she was gentle, but she was not going to let me have any of that.
Wow.
And so she assigns me to go pray with the resurrection account. I believe it's in John's Gospel, chapter 20. Could be 19. No,
John
it's 20.
20, yeah.
It's 20. And where Peter and John are running to the tomb together. You and I was just commenting on your painting on that here.
Yes.
And she's like, the younger one runs ahead, but waits at the door for the older one to come and follows him in. And Peter is the one, because of his dignity, that enters first. She says something along the lines of look, your heart and your mind have been running together, and your mind, in some ways, because of all of your studying, and I haven't described enough, but I studied a ton that year, read a lot of books, and had a lot of intentional conversations on the Catholic faith. But your mind kind of has to stop at the doorway and trust your heart. She's like, just pray with this and just see what comes. And there was a call in there. And this is the truth that came to me in that holy hour on Holy Thursday. Jesus founded a church, and he wants everyone to be in it. And so I should be in it too.
Wow.
And it's that simple. And it was like, look, I don't understand Apostolicae Curae. But it doesn't matter. Because the greater truths are clear to me. That Jesus founded a church, namely the Catholic Church, that he wants to be steady as it has been. And he wants the entire world to be part of it. And since I see that, I must trust those the Lord has put in my life right now. Even though I don't understand all of the details, even though I tried to do all the theological research and it's above my head, I must trust the Lord because I know him, because I do mental prayer. I know him in adoration, and I know he's calling me and I have to follow, and that's it. And there was a real abandonment in that. And so, fast forward, it's Easter Vigil. We're standing in line for the procession, and frankly, I'm still not totally at peace. I've decided I think I have to do this, but my heart is, the butterflies are still going, and the unsteadiness is still there. Mm-hmm. And I share this with one of my friends, Jesse, who was in my small group. And he had a 10-year journey into the Catholic Church, an intellectual journey with the fathers. 10 years. It was like almost half my life at that point, wow. And actually, it was over half my life at that point, yeah. And I was just sharing this with Jesse, and he just kind of turns and looks at me, just kind of looks off in the distance for a second. He just says, like, well, James, you know that Catholic Church teaches that we can't really understand the sacraments until we receive them. And I was like, oh, well, that makes sense. And all my objections were gone. Oh! And it was just so simple, and it was almost playful. But I was like, oh, okay, that works. Wow. That's all I needed in that moment. And we walk in, Easter Vigil Mass, best day of my life.
Mm. Wow.
And I remember doing my first Thanksgiving after communion, which is super special because the AVI push really hard two things: daily mental prayer and Thanksgiving after communion. The Lord of the universe is in you right now. You're a living tabernacle. Don't run in the parking lot. Spend time with him.
Wow.
Everyone else in your life will be there after a few minutes, but he is uniquely present to you right after you commune with him. So make that well. And kneeling down, and there was his voice again. Welcome home.
Wow.
And the blessed gift of tears in that moment. Oh my goodness. And just remembering praying, Jesus, help me to never take this for granted and to make every communion as well as this one.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. It's funny, the journey that year, 2012 through Easter of 2013, was in many ways a very lonely one. It was, I had some Catholic connections. That's how I got introduced to the whole Catholic world. But there was a lot of introspective soul searching going on in that time. And even in RCIA, I had some connections and some friends. Some of them are my best friends to this day. But I felt very alone with the Lord, but I felt that I was hiking alone on this path. Everything changed after Easter. It was weird because I'd been going to daily mass. I was like around the center all year, but I didn't have a lot of friends. I made like 20 amazing friends the 2 weeks after Easter. It was the Lord was just pouring it in.
Wow.
And many of those are, still my best friends to this day. And the whole Catholic world opened in its beauty, opened up to me, and just a stunning way that I never would have expected. And it became so fun.
Wow.
And I felt the change in my own heart of just how much more full of life I was, nourished by the sacraments. It just was like rocket fuel on my mental prayer.
Wow.
Took that to a whole new level. Remain with me. I can now.
Wow.
Because I can receive you in communion every day. I always could because of my baptism, but we're on a whole nother plane here.
Yes.
Yeah. Just everything was brought to a new light. The touch of Jesus to the blind man. He touches me when I receive his body. That's the definition of a touch.
Yeah.
It was just like the intimacy with Jesus that is afforded by the Holy Eucharist is unmatched by anything in the world.
Right.
And I kind of knew that intellectually during RCIA, but I had no expectation of how real that would become.
Wow.
When I entered the fold. And the deep rest that my heart felt being part of a community and not having all the responsibility on my shoulders to figure it all out. What does this world mean? How do I reckon with suffering and evil? Who is Jesus? All of those are very personal questions that in our conscience we have to attest to. However, to not be alone in that. Because during RCIA, you're it's kind of like shopping for jobs. I could join any number of different organizations,
Yeah.
And it ultimately has to be your personal decision, which is a graced one, but which the Lord also rewards you for. There's a deep rest in just being part of a flock. A universal one that's timeless.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't have to worry about being left out to dry. Ever.
Yeah.
I'm home.
Yes. James, this is so good. And I think that's a good way to wrap up this this time together. And then I want to invite you to a part 2 for what happened after and what your like your discernment and all that process as well.
Becoming a religious, traveling around the country, studying philosophy and theology, going doing mission work, all that stuff.
But for those of you out there who may or may not listen to part 2, James, what's your final word to people from this episode today? What's your encouragement to the listeners? And I'm refreshed by hearing your story, and I love the familial aspect and the communal aspect of your journey. And so thank you so much for sharing and being vulnerable and honest. And man, this is such a work of the Holy Spirit. It's awesome. I love it, man.
I think, it was very fitting that I would later go on, spoiler alert here, to join the Apostles of the Interior Life.
Yes.
Like, the interior life was super important on my journey, right? But in truth, I have found it to be so real for me that there is no greater adventure than the interior life. The journey of prayer is not just the most valuable thing that you will do with your day, with your time. It's not just the most important thing, but it's truly the most exciting thing and the most enriching thing. And you're crazy to pass it up.
Wow.
Like, what are you doing? Like, there are no excuses.
Yeah.
At least I've never found a fitting one for myself. And it's really, like, I know in my conscience, if I ever go a day without prayer, I need to run to confession. Because of how deeply I know that Jesus loves me, that God the Father created me, that the Holy Spirit enlivens me. And I just pass that up for whatever little anxiety is currently in my mind. Anyway, I can go on a soapbox.
Yes.
But the interior life is life's greatest adventure, truly.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, brother.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
To a production of WCAT Radio. Please join us in our mission of evangelization. And don't forget, love lifts up when knowledge takes flight.